emailed my professor and I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm literally in the third round of the Australian Open. Can I please schedule another time to take my final? I don't know if they didn't believe me or what, but I ended up not being able to do it.
That's the biggest flex extension request I've ever heard. All right, we are back for another episode of Under the Number. Today, I'm joined by CiCi Bellis. CiCi is a former professional tennis player, and she is currently founder and general partner at Cartan Capital. CiCi, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
Absolutely. So our mutual connection here is through my cousin Ryan, who played a lot of tennis with you back in the day. I know you guys spent a ton of time training together, and I texted her earlier today, letting her know that you were coming on, and I asked if there was anything that stood out about her time when you guys played together or anything that I should bring up. And I want to read you the text that she very quickly got, like off the cuff, got back to me with, and just kind of get your reaction. So she said, a lot of the time we spent together was when we were extremely young, and it revolved around really hard training sessions in Florida. But I've never in my life seen a more perfect combination of talent to become the best in the world than CiCi. If she hadn't gotten injured, I'm convinced that she would have won multiple slams by now. She had the most live arm of any girl I've ever seen. She was like a 90-pounder at age 14, and yet the ball off her racket hit the ground like a boy's. On big points, instead of backing off and playing a little safer like most juniors, she stepped up and went for it. She wasn't distracted on the court. She never looked over to her parents or coaches or searched for anyone's approval. But it actually makes total sense that she's doing so well in business now, because her attitude towards challenges and her work ethic were insane. She didn't let any distractions in during the biggest matches and never backed down under pressure. Most juniors got tight and played not to lose, but she would step up and rip a forehand inside out when it mattered most. I do remember when we were 15, I had a wild card into the US Open junior qualifiers and was training in Florida with the USTA. The entire coaching staff and all the players were watching her win against Sibylkova in the main draw. And it was like, holy shit, a 15-year-old just beat the number 3 player in the world. One of the coaches just looked over at all of us and said, yep, CiCi will be number 1. It's such a shame that her wrist ended her career, but I'm so happy you're having her on today.
Wow. I don't know how to respond to all of that. I think I would say all of the same things about her. She was seriously like, we were all best friends growing up in a group. I know we mentioned this kind of offline. We had a group of around, 8 or 10 girls, and we all used to train together, play each other every week in tournaments, but we're best friends on and off the court. And she was certainly, one of my best friends growing up. And it's a bummer I haven't seen her in a little while since, we kind of went separate ways and I turned pro and was traveling a ton. But yeah, she's always someone that I hold super close to my heart. So it's so funny that we have that mutual connection. And yeah, we played a ton of doubles together growing up as well. We were a pretty solid doubles team. But yeah, she's awesome.
Tell me a little bit about those extremely intense training sessions in Florida at such a young age. I mean, you hear about this in golf and tennis and a lot of individual sports. The grind is like no other, right? And you're talking about you are training with other people, so you have some sort of camaraderie or people to commiserate with maybe when things are particularly challenging. But at the end of the day, you are on your own out there. Talk about some of those early experiences and how formative some of those may have proved to be for you over time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say starting around 8 years old, and Ryan was a part of those groups. We were all kind of grouped based on kind of like our birth year is how the USTA did it. And so we were the 99 group, we were kind of the rockstar 99s that all used to train together. And like you mentioned, definitely commiserate together a lot of the time. But yeah, it was pretty intense, training sessions. I would say a typical day was, maybe 2 hours on court in the morning, 2 hours on court in the afternoon. You would have fitness maybe for maybe an hour and a half or so, split between kind of a morning warm up session and kind of maybe whether it's a cardio or lifting session in the afternoon. And then, it was recovery after that. It was, making sure you're fueling and getting ready for the next day. So it was definitely, a full-time job from a really young age. And I feel lucky to have, friends that I did it with did, the whole, training, traveling, competing against, through that period. And I feel like it's, a lot of them are still my best friends now, like Ryan. And we were lucky to have done it together, but it definitely instilled a work ethic in me. And I think all of us that went through that from a really young age. And I would not trade that for anything, going through those experiences, especially with that group of girls. And, it instilled a lot of amazing qualities from 8 years old into all of us, and now we're all succeeding in many different areas. So it's really fun to see how that has kind of shown through, and those traits are still working across different industries.
When you look back now and you have the years having gone by to reflect on it, what are some of the intangible qualities or traits that some of those kids, I mean, you said 8 years old, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, what are some of those traits that served people the best on the tennis court and in such an intense solo battle playing a one-person sport like tennis?
Yeah, I am certainly biased. I think tennis is one of the hardest sports in terms of combining everything, physicality, mental, especially, guys are out there playing 5-set matches and grand slams. Obviously, women play 2 out of 3, but I would say extreme levels of determination and perseverance are kind of what was instilled into us from a young age. Whether it was in training, we were never, people who would just walk off the court in the middle of a training session if we were tired or if things weren't going our way. And same, during a match, if things were, maybe going south or we weren't playing our best that day. I felt like we had such a strong foundation from training that we were able to take into matches. And I would just say, it sounds cliche, but really, determination, work ethic, and just never giving up, and just being determined to win and get through anything that was kind of put in front of us.
I'm sure you had a big slate of coaches and mentors over the years. Who are some of the people who stand out the most? And what are some of the maybe specific teachings or one-liners that you still think of or might still come to mind all these years later and might still really help you as you're dealing with a totally different set of challenges running a venture capital firm?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say at different periods of my tennis career, I had different mentors, just depending on, age and level and kind of what help I was getting, from them. And so I would say, from my earliest age, my mom was someone who got me into tennis initially, and she played junior tennis growing up and really enjoyed the game, and so she kind of got me into it and got me loving the sport. And as I got older, I started training more with the USTA. I had amazing coaches within USTA that helped my career. And on the mentor side, Chrissie Evert was one of my biggest mentors growing up. She, was the queen of perseverance and determination in her day. And, obviously, encompassed the whole kind of like ice queen, persona that everybody gave her in the best way. And, she was so calm, cool, collected, and the one of the strongest minds that I'd ever met. And so she instilled a lot of those qualities that I mentioned into me. And I'd have weekly meetings with her and just getting her perspective on different areas of my game or I guess paths during my career. I would say she was such a huge help. And I always loved the way that she mentioned to me that she always trained where the court was actually smaller than it really is. So she would bring the lines in, a few feet, and she would play practice matches that way and make sure that she was never, hitting too close to the line. She had so much, margin for error. And it was so interesting always to hear her mention that, form of training. And I love doing that as well. And then, as I got older, I had amazing coaches. My coach for pretty much the entirety of my career is a British guy named Tom Guttridge. He's actually a USTA coach right now as well. And I would say, we just had an amazing kind of like working relationship, and just loved kind of taking pieces of what he thought about my game, combining it with areas that I wanted to improve. We had really good kind of like communication and worked together really well. But I had so many mentors during my career. It's tough to list all of them, but those are some key ones.
And I know you played a ton of big matches over the years. You at one point were the number 35 player in the world. People obviously remember most the time when you were the 15-year-old playing in the US Open back in 2014. Do you remember what emotions were going through your head? Is this the type of thing where it was so overwhelming and incredible that you're almost like are blacked out mentally during the event itself? Take us back to that day in 2014.
15 years old, I got into the event based on winning the US 18 under hardcourt tournament in the juniors within the USTA. And so the winner of that event every year gets a wild card into the US Open. It's a great kind of opportunity for amazing young US juniors. And so won that event, got the wild card in. Drew Sibelkova in the first round, knew it was going to be, tough. She had made finals of Australian Open that year. She was playing some of the best tennis of her career. And, going into the match, I think a lot of my kind of like mentors and people that I relied on heavily during that period were, very insistent that, just go out and believe in yourself. And I think that's something that I always did. And I never really needed someone to tell me to believe in myself. I felt I could go out and, play with anyone and, at least make a match competitive with anyone in the world. Even though I'd really never played any pro tournaments, I just felt with my training and, what I was putting in, on the practice court in the gym at that period, that I could go out and, at least give someone a good match, like someone like a Sibelkova. And so, yeah, I went out and don't remember a ton, during the match, like you mentioned, definitely was kind of a blur, but, yeah. I think just tried to believe in myself as much as I could. And I remember being down in the third set and just thinking to myself, gosh, this would have been a really good opportunity for me to, win this match and get an awesome win under my belt. Ended up just, again, fighting, was so determined to persevere and got back into the match. I remember she made a couple unforced errors and was able to work myself back in. And yeah, it was definitely an incredible moment for me, especially that early into my career. I was super, super young at that time, and it was a lot to handle, all the attention at that period. But yeah, an awesome experience overall.
You talked about, we've mentioned a couple times now, the level of physical training and the cardio and the fitness and all this preparation on the physical side. It seems to me, and this could be really an oversimplification, but it seems like there is a certain point where physically you get to a point where you can hang and you're not going to out physical. This is separate from putting on muscle and being physically bigger and hitting the ball harder. But as far as like keeping your cardio and being able to stay in a match where you can hang with just about any opponent, you're not going to be run off the court because your cardio is not up to par. At which point it all seems to come down to the mental game, ability to stay focused, the ability to stay out of your head, have this positive self-talk, to not allow yourself to tense up and start to push and like get the yips and all the things that can really happen in any sport, but I think are most pronounced in tennis and golf, and I guess baseball pitchers are also known for the yips. But when you talk to, say, younger athletes today, let's just get specific, younger women's tennis players, if they came to you and said, hey, I'm working out so hard, I'm doing everything that I can, when I play well, I'm incredible, but I can't get over the hump of this mental game. And I'm so far in my head. And when it comes time for an actual match, my performance anxiety is through the roof, and, all the things that come with it. I could go on and on. What do you tell them? What would be the advice to somebody dealing with that? Because that is a low, low place to find yourself when you think you're doing everything you can, and yet the voice inside your head is preventing you from playing the best version of your sport.
Yeah, and that's a great question. There are so many tennis analysts out there that would say tennis is upwards of 80 or even 90% mental, and I couldn't agree more. There's so much that goes into it because you're not in a sport where you're necessarily competing against yourself, with a time, thinking about, swimmers that compete with times and times, even though they have other people they're competing against, it's always, what is my best time that I can, get to, or, in golf, I'm making sure that I hit the lowest out of, a massive field of players, score the lowest. And with tennis, you're always playing against one other singular person. And so there's so much that can go into that mentally, whether it's, game styles, maybe your game doesn't match up against that person, that going into it, and you have to change your game, or there's pressure based on, you should on paper beat this person, yet they're playing really well and, maybe you're losing. There's so much within tennis that can go into the mental side of things and can affect play to an extreme degree. And so when I talk to players that, younger players, that are dealing with some mental struggles and, whatever it is, what I always suggest is to put yourself under extreme pressure and practice. There are many different techniques that you can do this, but make sure you're feeling that same pressure in practice that you're feeling in matches. If you're going out and practicing and it's all, rainbows, butterflies, super easy, and whether it's hard physically, or not, it doesn't matter. Tennis in a match is going to be hard physically. Tennis in practice is going to be hard physically. if your practice isn't hard mentally and taxing mentally and somewhat representative of what a match would bring in terms of, pressure, high stakes, there's no way that you will be able to be prepared for those, big moments in matches. So I tried to make my training as pressure filled as possible with, different techniques, and tried to really envision that I was, in those really tight, big moments in matches. And that's definitely what I try and impart to younger players as well when they're dealing with, mental hurdles or struggles.
On the preparation front, something that I've just, as someone who did not continue my tennis career beyond age 9, I've never considered how much time is put into basically film study of an opponent and understanding, like you said, it's understanding your opponent's game. When there's a tournament and like you said, there's a draw, okay, I've got this many days before this match, I know who I'm playing. Maybe I've never heard of this person before. Like that, I mean, I think that is something that still very much happens. How much of it has to do with the scouting report on your opponent versus saying, look, I know how I'm going to play, and however they respond is how they respond, but I need to focus on my game, and the rest will take care of itself. What's that balance look like?
That's a really interesting question. I would say at the highest level, you pretty much know everyone in the field unless it's a random wild card, which, is similar to what I had against Sivakova and was definitely, to my advantage because I'd really never played a pro match before that. But generally, most of the field at the highest level, you can watch film of those players. We have great resources here in the US with the USTA. They share film on pretty much every match that are scheduled to play, with the opponent, their strengths, weaknesses, different percentages, where they might, serve on big points, things like that. So I'd say there's a fair bit of time within tournaments where you are scouting your next opponent, or even, going up to their match and watching, if they're playing after you, you're going to play the winner of a certain match in the next round, or watching them on TV, whatever it is. Most high-level pro athletes definitely have a team that spends a lot of time scouting for them as well. So I'd say there's a balance of, the player doing it and their team doing it. At the lower levels, it's really hard to find, solid film on every single player out there unless they've played, at the biggest stages. So it's less of that and more of focusing on yourself when you get out there. I would say for myself, I did a lot of scouting because my game style would never be able to like blow somebody off the court with power or, winners or anything like that. I was definitely more of a strategic type of player. I was really fast. I tried to break people down in terms of, extending rallies and exploiting weaknesses in more of a strategic way. So I would play against those, larger hitters that would be able to blow someone off the court and try and get them uncomfortable. And that's how I won a lot of matches. And so I would have to change up my game style and change up, where I'd be hitting or how I would play players more so than someone who has the ability to step on a court and the match would be on their racket. I would never really step on a court, especially in pros where the match would be on my racket. In juniors, I felt like I could actually, and I was more of an aggressive player in juniors back when Ryan and I were playing together. But once I hit pros, the physicality just became such a huge piece of it. And I had to use the strengths that I had, which were speed, cardio, fitness to my advantage at that point.
So take me back. You grew up in Hillsborough, which is just minutes from the Stanford campus. Had you not decided to go pro, you would have gone to Stanford. We would have overlapped for 2 years, which would have been another funny small world. Tell me about that decision process. When did it become very clear that, look, I'm not going to college. I'm going to go the pro route. I'll get my degree some other way, ultimately online. But, particularly when that had been so close, you had just lived down the street from Stanford and probably looked at, Hoover Tower all the time growing up. What was that decision calculus like?
It was really hard. Much like your cousin Ryan, education was a big piece of, our growing up years in addition to tennis. And that was always something that, both of our parents instilled in us, and my parents definitely did. And so I knew that with my tennis, I could, obviously get into an amazing university like Stanford, obviously making sure my education was up to par as well. And so growing up, I used to go to the Stanford matches. I used to, watch the players that I idolized on the team. And it was such a dream of mine to go there, and ended up committing to play there, I believe, when I was 17, and, did the whole official tour. I spent so much time over there over the years, just playing tennis with the team there, and went to clinics at Stanford growing up. And so felt like it was really, in my backyard, and felt so comfortable there from a young age. And so was so excited, when I committed there. And that was always a big, kind of goal of mine to go. And so it would have taken me a lot to, do something else and not end up going to Stanford. And so kind of had a ranking goal in mind. I was already playing pro tournaments at that point. I kind of figured, hey, if I make top 100 in the world on the WTA tour, I feel like it would be the right choice to pursue professional tennis, prior to college, and not kind of stall my pro career by going to college, which is what a lot of players and high-level juniors would potentially see collegiate tennis as, unless you're, someone whose game might benefit from, a little bit of extra maturity and things like that. But anyway, I felt that ranking goal was a solid kind of benchmark for me to turn professional. And I think about 4 months after I committed to Stanford, I hit that ranking goal. And, it was at the US Open. I ended up turning pro after, I believe I qualified 1 year, and then made third round of the US Open, and was going to be top 100 after that event. And, figured it was time that I definitely kind of jump fully into this, and not have kind of like 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out. And so ended up turning pro at that point. And yeah, the year that I turned pro, the WTA partnered with Indiana University. So like you mentioned, I was able to complete my degree online while I was playing, which was great. And I knew I wanted to continue my education. So that was really exciting for me.
And it's really impressive that you did that while being a pro. I mean, the lifestyle and the grind of professional tennis is crazy. I heard you mention on another podcast that I was listening to in preparation for this, you travel up to 40 weeks a year. Talk a little bit about the grind of the lifestyle that comes with doing this, playing in this global ecosystem and going to all the matches, and what it does to your body and all the downstream impacts of what is just table stakes if you want to compete.
It's really difficult. And that was something I really, really struggled with, and something that I heavily considered when deciding if I was going to turn professional or go to Stanford. And I'm the type of person, I'm very close with my family. I am a homebody in a certain sense. And so traveling that many weeks a year was definitely kind of a culture shock in a way, even though in juniors tennis, you travel a fair bit, but it's nothing like, what you would do as a full-time job, obviously. And so it was really hard for me, honestly. It was difficult, especially adding, education on top of that was hard to juggle. But there is a lot of downtime, whether it's on flights or, at the end of the day, post matches or post training. So I felt I had enough time on the school side of things. It was actually, I have a funny story. There was 1 year I was playing the Australian Open, and I was playing my third round match, and I had a final in school that day in finance. And I remember I was emailing my professor. It was some weird hour that I was either going to be like mid-match or asleep based on Australian hours. I can't remember which of the two. And I emailed my professor, and I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm literally in the third round of the Australian Open. Can I please schedule another time to take my final? And I don't know if they didn't believe me or what, but I ended up not being able to do it. And anyway, that was one of the funnier kind of experiences during school, but that was the only time I was not able to reschedule. And then a week later, the professor emailed me and was apologetic and ended up letting me retake it later on. But and yeah, it's a really tough lifestyle. It's hard on the body. You're playing week in and week out. The travel is also tough on the body. Just having your whole kind of circadian rhythm off, your whole, with different time zones and sleep and everything like that. So I would say that definitely contributes to injury and, just a tough, lifestyle in the body overall. So that was the most difficult piece for me was the travel.
That's the biggest flex extension request I've ever heard.
I know. And at first she didn't believe me. So funny. And I was like, please, check online. I promise this is me. Anyway, she ended up letting me do it, but it was pretty funny at first.
That's unreal. So I'm curious also, in that professional lifestyle, how much did you feel like you could relate to or build relationships with some of the other women on tour? I assume you're kind of going from city to city, tournament to tournament, seeing a lot of familiar faces at these things. And of course, if you end up playing each other, it's going to be all business. But, I feel like you were probably in a unique position, taking your academics as seriously as you were simultaneously, and given your upbringing and being, growing up in Silicon Valley and having kind of what's been demonstrated now, a relatively diverse set of interests and how was it just relating to the other people on the tour? Not to mention the age gap that exists. I mean, you can be hanging out waiting to play a match against someone who's 15, 20 years older than you are.
It was a tough learning experience because I came from junior tennis where we were friends with everybody. Everybody was pretty much best friends with everyone. It was very lighthearted. I mentioned our kind of, California tennis friend group growing up. And, there was such a fun, you know, energy and vibe in junior tennis, and everyone was having a good time. And it was less serious, of course. And then when I went into pro tennis, like you mentioned, the age gap was really hard when I was starting because there was no one else, honestly, near my age playing. And so I felt definitely a bit kind of like secluded from a lot of the players at that point. And as I continued playing and time passed, there were players that started to come up that were my age, and so was always very good friends with those players. And even I would say in international junior tournaments, it was a fun energy. We were all great friends, and so once those players started coming up, it was a lot more fun. But definitely, there are players out there that don't want to make friends, and they make it clear that they're there for business, and that's it. So that was definitely something that took me a while to get used to, because if I'm traveling 40 weeks a year, I want to at least enjoy it, have fun with people. On weeks that I win, weeks that I lose, that would be a very even tougher lifestyle if you were kind of secluding yourself from any sort of like friend relationship or anything. So as time went on, it got easier, but it was definitely a kind of a learning curve to start.
That transition from junior to pro, it seems like a rising tide situation where everyone's just trying to make it, and people probably kind of want to help each other. And then you get to the big leagues, to the pros, and it's very cutthroat. Real money on the line. There are people's careers on the line.
People's careers are on the line, and a lot of players, especially at the lower levels, are fighting week to week to break even and just not lose money. And so it's a different lifestyle. I was lucky enough to not have financial pressure growing up, and certainly felt that way, entering the pro tour as well. But there were players out there that certainly did, and it was a different vibe that completely made sense. So it was just something to get used to.
So this is a question that might be kind of more big picture than it's really meant to be. But did you find that a lot of the best players on tour were maniacally obsessed and singularly focused with tennis to the point where they had nothing else going on and were relatively one-dimensional, and that it was really a positive thing for their game and their career? Or was it people who actually had kind of multiple interests and the ability to unplug or to disconnect from the super high pressure elements of their tennis career? What did that look like? I'm sure that maybe it was a mix, but I'm curious your take.
That is such a good question. And I don't know if this is a hot take, but it is definitely the former for the best players. I would say, I will not name any names, but there were certainly players out there that made it known that they do not want friends. Tennis is their only focus. I would walk past someone in a locker room every single week and smile and say hi, and they wouldn't turn around, and they would just continue, whatever they were doing, which is totally fine. That's how they wanted to, just handle the sport. That was always, hard for me to comprehend. I always made sure that, I had a great time with my team wherever we went. We tried to sightsee where we could. We went out for, nice dinners and had a good time. Tried to see as many sites, during kind of tournament periods. But yeah, it was definitely the former. It was hard for me to definitely, adjust to that, knowing that, no junior players were really like that. So a learning curve again, but definitely the former for the top players. I mean, if you watch tennis, you can figure out who would be like that for sure.
Let's talk about the career transition at this point. You started dealing with a lot of injuries, and I assume over time it started to creep into your mind that maybe this tennis thing wasn't going to be able to go on forever. Talk about the transition out of the game, how honestly the feelings that came with it, because it's such a difficult moment leaving any sport, and let alone at the professional level. I truly can't imagine, particularly given the body of work you had behind you. Take me back to that time in your life and what you were considering, and could you even fathom having another career, or let alone running a venture firm like today? But what was going through your head?
Yeah, it was really difficult. It was a challenging period, just from a mental standpoint, figuring out if this is really going to happen. Is this the right choice? Whatever. Because I had, just a few years prior, taken that big leap, gone professional, given up, going to Stanford. So there was so much, I guess, build up to, my professional career. And yeah, physically, I was never really able to kind of withstand the lifestyle. It's like I mentioned, week in, week out, travel, playing. Physically, I was not, the same size as a lot of the players that I was playing against. So I felt I was getting beat up quicker out there. And so, yeah, my body just never was really able to hold up, and had, a couple wrist and elbow surgeries, and, kind of got to the point where I didn't want to be in the same, injury rehab cycle and not, honestly see much improvement. The wear and tear was just so tough, and, had really worn me down. And so, yeah, after one kind of final surgery, I began thinking, hey, if this doesn't work out and I still have pain, after this, I really don't want to think about one, getting another surgery, but continue kind of, again, the same, cycle. I was so success driven, and not to make it sound weird, but like results driven. Like I wanted goals, I wanted, things to
Right.
be able to achieve.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to, have that during that kind of like injury cycle. And so that's just very core to my personality, and what I am interested in and what keeps me going. And so, I started to think at that point, hey, what would be a next step for me? And so I was training out in Florida at the USTA out there. And, I was starting to chat with, some of the executives within USTA, like what could not only a next step be for me, but, I had connections at, companies nearby, and ended up getting an internship via an executive at USTA that helped me out. And, I wanted to try something new, and was able to do that. It was definitely a challenging decision, but again, being so kind of goal oriented, I needed to have something else that I was focused on. And so it ended up being a really difficult period, and it took some time to not have that, similar lifestyle, and not think about, waking up, going to train, coming home at the end of the day, and being done for the day. It was so different. And I think that was the biggest transitional period for me. But, it was bound to happen at some point, whether it was, now, back then, or, post career when I was 35. So, yeah, I was ready for a change, and got the opportunity to do so, and I took it.
So I want to dig into Cartan a lot more. Before we do that, can you give me a brief flyover of that period between retiring from tennis and raising this fund and getting this thing launched?
Yeah, for sure. So that internship that I got was at a early stage sports tech focused venture firm nearby, the USTA. And growing up in the Silicon Valley, I was always really interested in venture. My scholastic background was in business and finance. I knew actually going into Stanford when I committed there that I wanted to get into venture post, collegiate tennis career. And so it felt like the most incredible next step for me, getting an opportunity at that firm. And I did not even realize there was something as niche of a focus as sports tech within venture. I thought, growing up in, Silicon Valley, it was always just general tech investing. And so having that angle and being able to bring a professional athlete point of view to that firm, where a lot of the investments we were looking at was tech that I'd personally tried out, in my career prior to that. That was super valuable for them. And they really took me under their wing, got me up to speed really quickly. Of course, I took that same, determination, drive, and was pulling, I wouldn't say all-nighters, but pretty darn close to make sure I was up to speed on everything. And yeah, stayed at that firm for about 4 years. I did my MBA while I was there. And back in 2023, really wanted to not only build upon their investment thesis and broaden it out a little bit into, more sports adjacent industries, into health, into wellness, but, also I wanted to build something on my own. I had been the CEO of my team within tennis for my entire life in that career. And I wanted to invest myself. I wanted to start something on my own. And so I ended up leaving that firm and launched our first fund about a month later. And so we're on our second fund now, and happy to get into the details of that. But yeah, it was really something that had been in the back of my mind for a while. I knew getting into venture, the goal was to start my own firm one day. And in tennis, everything is on your shoulders because it's a singular sport. Team sports, obviously, you win as a team, you lose as a team. And I felt that way within tennis with my team. We won as a team, even though I was the one playing, and same when I lost. But at the end of the day, I'm the one making the decision on match point and in those tight moments on the tennis court. And I wanted to have that same feeling and have that same pressure on my shoulders within business. And so it was time for me to do it back in 2023.
Two things on that. One is it's incredible what growing up in Silicon Valley does for you. I don't think I really knew what venture capital was when I was arriving on the Stanford campus as a freshman. That was certainly not a pre-chosen, ideal career path from childhood. Two, the group that you were with shortly after your career, that was the Adidas family office, right? Lead, isn't that what that's associated with?
Essentially, yeah, they were a major stakeholder in the firm.
Okay. Yeah, that's an awesome place to find yourself.
Yeah,
So
it was
talk
awesome.
now about more specifically, what are the core pillars that Cartan operates within? And at what stage are you most comfortable, or where do you spend most of your time?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, we're on to our second fund now, which is super exciting. But our overall thesis for the firm is what we like to call human performance. So you can think of it as anything involving sports, health, or wellness, and usually it's tech underneath those areas. So on the sports side, I'd say we're very broad. We'll look at pretty much anything that touches sports. So you can think anything from, fan engagement solutions to data and analytics within sports to, athletic performance, or what does the next generation of sports viewership look like? We're seeing a ton in the NIL space. Pretty much anything that could be applied to sports is what we like to think of it as. And then on the health side of things, we're slightly more narrow in terms of our thesis. We do not look at biotech or pharma. I feel like we would need, a dedicated full-time team member with expertise in that space to feel comfortable investing in those areas. But we stay more on the side of, wellness, fitness, nutrition, longevity, recovery, digital health, preventative health, healthcare, kind of some pillars on the health side that we see often. And we're seed and Series A investors. We're flexible across both, and we don't lead rounds. So a lot of what we like to do is create, deep relationships with firms, across the country, and firms that invest in those areas, and work with them on rounds. And, where we can kind of bring in our sports expertise and our network to support in those areas.
What's it like being a sports-focused VC in the Bay Area?
It's wild. It's pretty fun though. A lot of my connections are generalist VCs, which is great. And, we are viewed as, a really strong addition to a lot of funding rounds that could have applications in sports, given that. So I love it. It's really fun. I also love hearing about, what other VCs are looking at in spaces that we don't, just to get a general kind of feel of the market in other areas. But yeah, it's super fun. It's not as common out here for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I've talked to, take one example, Wayne Kimmel at 76 Capital. They're out in Philly, and you think about these major sports markets. I live in Dallas. I think Dallas is a fantastic sports market, DFW, Chicago, Philadelphia, and having lived in San Francisco, it's just simply not a sports crazed population. Though I'm sure there are other people in there, it's not to be discounting them, but it's not the same kind of palpable thing. And yet the sophistication and the talent cluster when it comes to early stage investors is the strongest there. So it's kind of I was curious what your answer might be as how that push and pull goes.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I'd say our thesis around sports is maybe broader than other sports tech firms as well, where, we'll invest in a company that doesn't look like it's sports tech, but could have an applications in sports where we can kind of plug in our network and be a, supercharger for them. So I would say, it's broader than you would think. And a lot of companies that, you wouldn't think on the surface might have an application in sports. Maybe they want athletes to come on as brand ambassadors. Maybe they want a connection to, one of the pro sports leagues or teams in our network, something to that effect. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. A lot of generalist tech companies though, out here, even if they're not building specifically in sports, can, be complemented by something that we can bring to the table. So that's how we kind of like to look at it.
So here's a two-part question. What is the skill or the skill set that you acquired through your tennis career that has helped you the most as a venture capitalist? And now sitting here today, what is the area in which you've made the most progress since making the transition to becoming a venture capitalist, where you look back to a couple of years ago and think, wow, I knew nothing about this compared to where I am today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say to your first part, I think I've mentioned these traits, but being so focused and dedicated and just the willingness to win and persevere. I think, I took those traits immediately when I started in venture. I mentioned, I was spending so much time even outside of the office, making sure I was up to speed on what was going on, in investment committee meetings and deal flow meetings, and making sure, I didn't feel like my previous career had held me back in any way. And so I would say that has given me a lot in the space, and something that I'm still doing on a day-to-day basis, and still, making sure that, I never feel like I've learned everything. Obviously I don't think anyone ever has. And so I certainly feel like I'm always learning and always finding, new areas to learn about, new, just, pieces about venture that I want to learn more about, things like that. And so I think that's just that drive, I think is something that I take from tennis, and I'm still very much using to this day. And then I think something that, maybe I've learned, I never really had experience with, investors, with LPs. I would say tennis is a very, you and your team type of industry and sport. And so now, I'm working with other firms, I'm working with LPs, there's many different stakeholders that, VCs work with on a day-to-day basis. And so being able to manage all of that has been something that is definitely been a learning experience. I've never raised capital before. It's been a learning experience, and something that I'll continue to learn about as we grow. And so I would say that's been the, biggest learning curve. When I started Cartan, I'd never raised $1 in my life, obviously, coming from an athlete background. So that's been the biggest learning curve for sure.
What's your single biggest takeaway from the fundraising side?
Relationships take very long to cultivate, but the best relationships are the ones that you spend the most time on.
Well said. Seed, Series A, human performance centric. Where can founders get in touch with you or reach out to the team at Cartan?
Yeah. So we have a Cartan email address that we accept like all inbound deal flow and everything. So that's info@cartancapital.com. Also, you can just message us on our LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn. We're ready to chat with you.
All right, CiCi, this was absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for taking so much time to do this. I hope that there's a chance that we bump into each other this week in San Francisco. And if not, hope to talk again soon. But thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Brent.